Good morning, Claudia and Danielle. Welcome. We'll get started here in a sec. Let me know, guys, if you've decided on who you're going to interview this week. I'm curious who you're going to interview, what family member, and why you chose this person. Remember that the objective here is to try to interview someone that you know well, but that you want to learn more about in terms of his or her perspective on education. So I'm curious who you're thinking about interviewing. If you'd like to let me know, you can unmute your mic preferably, or if you want to upload in the chat, who do you plan to interview? Anybody want to share the person that you're going to interview? Feel free to unmute your microphone if you want to jump in and let us know. What do you think? Who do you plan to interview this week? Who do you plan to interview this week? Which family member do you plan to interview? Remember, we're going to create or prepare today for an interview. And we need to know first who you would like to interview.
Um, I have been thinking, and I think that it's a good idea to interview my brother because we can say that he didn't finish his education. He has never liked school, but he decided to study a kind of, I don't know how to say it in English, but it is called carrera técnica, chef.
A technical degree?
A technical degree as chef, and he is very good at it, and he is now working in restaurants. So yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a good choice. And this is something that I want to also make clear, guys, that when I say topics related to education, it doesn't necessarily mean formal education, right? So you could talk about formal education in terms of school, degree programs. It could also be informal education, or it could be informal learning, and someone that you know that has specific ideas or maybe experiences that you know that this person has had that you want to talk about. It could be in terms of formal education or informal education. And it basically can be about anything that relates to teaching and learning. So depending on the situation, depending on the person's experience, you could speak more towards learning, or if it's a situation where teaching also is involved in some way, you could also talk about that. But again, it does not have to be about only formal education. It could also be hypotheticals. Remember that we have talked a lot about different types of conditionals, and the hypothetical conditionals are going to be really useful if we want to ask questions about, well, if you had finished a degree or you finished a high school degree, what would you have done if, right? It could also be hypothetical discussions and questions. It could be something real or hypothetical.
Mm.
So also keep that in mind. There's a lot of different options here that we have that we can talk about. Okay, and this is one of the reasons why we want to prepare, because there's so many different things you could actually discuss that we want to make sure that we're not just talking about things we already know about the person, but we're trying to build on what we already know, and we want to try to learn more from this person than what we knew before we conducted the interview. Very good. Thank you, Fernanda, for sharing that. Anyone else want to share who you're thinking about interviewing? And if you want to talk about why you think this person is a good candidate for this type of interview. Anybody else want to share who you're thinking about interviewing? And if you want to talk about why you chose that person. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Today, I want to show you, we're going to work in small groups today in Zoom. We're going to break out into different rooms. But before we do that, I would like for you to access a file. If you go into Microsoft Teams, under the General tab, under Files, hopefully you can see my screen. I'm sharing my screen to show you where it is, so hopefully you can see this. Under week 11, since we're in week 11. And if you go under interview guide, you're going to see a list of a lot of Word documents. Choose any one of these and rename the file. If you click on these three dots, you should be given an option to rename the file. So just include your name, replace interview guide with your name. But each of these files are exactly the same. It's a template where we can start preparing for our interview guide. So you'll notice that there are basically two sections here of this interview guide. And I'm going to go ahead and open it up in my browser. You should be able to access this on your cell phone or mobile device. But here we have, in the first section, general information about your about the interview. Okay, sorry about that. Let me go back here. All right, so here you can fill out your name here. So you're the interviewer, and the interviewee is the person that you're going to be interviewing. So you can put your name here, put the person you're going to interview here. Here's the rationale or the reasoning for interviewing this person. So just a quick explanation as to why you chose this person. Why do you think this is a good person for this type of interview? Here you can indicate the date of the interview and the location. And here's specific topics that you want to cover. Now, this is where you need to reflect on what you know about the person, number one, and number two, what you want to learn from this person, what you want to know more about. So again, try to choose topics that relate to something perhaps you know something about, but you want to learn more about from this person. So here is a good place where you can reflect on that and list out specific topics. Again, it doesn't have to be a sentence. It can be just a list of keywords or items or themes that you want to cover in your interview. Later, when you finish the interview, you can come back to this and indicate how long the interview took place. And afterwards, you can also include here surprising aspects about the interviews, things that came up in the interview that you didn't expect. You can include that information here. So again, try to plan on things that you're going to learn something about, right? It's not going to be a good interview if you're interviewing someone and you already know all the answers to what he or she's going to say, right? So the whole point of doing this interview is to build on your current knowledge about this person, right? So to try to learn something more from the person. This is really at the heart of this interview. So this is the first section here, completing this. Again, most of this you can complete before you do the interview. The last two items you can complete after the interview. Now below is just a space, and this is where you can use this space however you want to prepare. Now I want to give you some tips though on what you can think about in preparing for the interview. Here's one thing I would suggest that you not do. I'm going to go ahead and type it out here. This is being recorded, so you'll have this later if you need to go back to it, and I'll delete it when I finish here for the purposes of this template. But here's one thing to consider. This is something not to do. Do not So don't do this. Don't prepare all the possible questions that you might ask in the interview. All right. This is what I would not do. All right. In fact, I would not even write out any questions in preparing for the interview. What I would do is I would write out or list key ideas, experiences, concepts, etc., that you plan to cover in your interview. So maybe just a list of different, again, this is going to depend a lot on your own situation. So if you're thinking about, let's say someone who was successful in creating a business, let's say starting a restaurant, you might even divide up your questions you could divide it up chronologically by time. You could say, okay, first I'm going to ask some questions about what this person or how this person felt about education or teaching or learning, or even something about his or her interest in cooking or creating a business. And then you could have questions related to maybe when the person first started opening up a business, right? So you could build and kind of have the person tell a story, right, that all relate to different questions that relate to education. Again, formal or informal education throughout this whole process, but through the person telling the story of his or her life experiences. Okay, so this is one way to do it. There are many ways that you can think about organizing your ideas, but maybe one way to do it is to organize it by key idea, key experience, key concept. Now, another tip that I would suggest doing is write out key question words. How, why, when, where, etc. Write out all the possible keywords. And this is a trick that students can use, especially when they're collecting data for doing research, is to write out the keywords. And when you're in the moment and you're asking questions to your interviewee, you can select, you can check off each of the key words as you ask or as the person answers those question words. So for example, you might ask a question like, well, how did you create your own business? How did you learn to start a new business? Well, the person might begin by talking about when something happened or where something happened. So as you're listening, you can also check off those keywords as the person is providing you the information. And then if there are any other keywords that were not discussed, or if there are any keywords that you want even to for him or her to go into greater detail, you could follow up with a question that provides more detail. All right, and this leads me to the next point. Prepare for follow-up questions. This is going to be at the heart of doing a good interview. This is the difference between doing an interview more just average, just doing an average interview versus one that's really informative and deep thinking, is the ability to prepare and and complete follow-up questions. So a follow-up question is, let's say you ask a question, they're giving you some information. Before you move on to the next question, you ask a follow-up question based on something that they told you. So this requires that you pay close attention to the detail that that they are giving you, and then you come back with an additional question based on what they told you. This could be the same question word, it could be the same how question, but more specific, or it could be one of the other question words. There's nothing wrong with coming back with the same question word, but provided that that you're asking something more specific. The whole point of the interview is to get a lot of detail, right? And most cases when somebody is going to respond, almost always there's an opportunity to ask a follow-up question that's more specific, right? Because seldom will they just right off the bat give you all the detail that you were possibly wanting, right off the bat, without having, again, a follow-up question. And it's going to depend on you as the interviewer to provide those questions. All right, so this is how I think we can start thinking about preparing. Use this space down below however you wish. If you want to do some sort of visual map, that's fine. If you want to use symbols, if you want to use lists, if you want to use an outline form to help organize your ideas. I'm not against you creating some questions if you want, if they're general questions, but I would suggest focusing more on the ideas themselves so that you can just come up with these questions as you need it. And this also helps so that you're not thinking about the next question, that you're really paying close attention to what the person's telling you, and it makes it more conversational in that way. If we have a lot of predetermined questions, then sometimes we're paying more attention to the question that's coming up than we are actually listening to what the person is trying to say. All right, so the first step, guys, try to go in. In fact, you can go in right now, if you can, to access your document and change the name. Again, I think the easiest way to change the name to your document is to go into Microsoft Teams and go under Files, Week 11, find any of these files, and you can replace the entire name if you want. Looks like Fernanda has done it successfully. Marcella, great. But you can remove the whole title if you want, just to make the title shorter, because they're all interview guides. So if you just want to put your first name, I think it'll make it easier for all of us to kind of see or find our own files. All right, make sure you've done that first. And then once you've done that, I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen. I'm going back into Zoom. Looks like we have 12 of us here today. So I'm going to create at random, automatically, going to include, let's see, I'm going to include 5 breakout rooms. And we're going to create these rooms automatically. So we're going to see how this goes. I'm going to create it. And I'm going to now open up all the rooms. And when I open up the rooms, you should be able to see with whom you have a breakout room. And you should have an option to join the breakout room that you've been assigned. So looks like Claudia is in, okay. And so if you're having problems finding the room, let me know, send me a chat here. I'm checking the chat. I know this is the first time we've tried this, so let's give it a shot, see what happens. And discuss, I'd like for you guys to discuss. I'm going to put this in the post here, discuss your interview. Okay, so make sure when you guys go into your rooms that you're sharing how you're going to prepare for your interview, work together, share each other's interview guide, and discuss how you're going to plan on sharing or preparing for your interview. Okay, guys, I think we'll go ahead and finish up for today. Just as a reminder, I'm going to share my screen here. Make sure, again, that in Microsoft Teams that you go in and you find your own interview guide. All of these are exactly the same to begin with, but find any one of these and change your name. I would suggest if you could just add your first name only, and you can replace interview guide with your name, since all of these are interview guides. So just to simplify, and just so that your name only, your first name only appears as the name of the file. So make sure that you've done that, and then make sure that you have completed this interview guide for your interview. I would like for you to conduct your interview or do your interview today with your family member before our class for tomorrow. And again, come up with questions, write out anything you think that you need to in your interview guide. And again, just to look at an example here, yeah, and you can fill this out however you wish, but try to include as much information as you can in this first part. And then below here, use any types of questions or concepts, list out ideas that you want to include here below to better prepare yourself for the interview. All right, so make sure for tomorrow's class, you have done your interview so we can begin using that information from your interviewee, your family member, to begin with the next activity. All right. So let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. Are there any questions about today's activity or doing the interview itself?
So the interview has to be recorded, like in video, or
Any questions about completing the interview guide, accessing it in the Word document in Microsoft Teams, or any questions about the interview? I'm not going to give you a time frame. You decide how long the interview needs to be, but it should be something that it should be a conversation where you're actually learning something new from your family member based on his or her prior experience, and it should relate in some way to education. Again, it can be formal education, it can be informal education, and it can be something related to teaching or learning. Think of the question words to help guide you. They can talk about what something is, where something is, when something happened, why something happened, right? So again, think of the question words to help prompt you in asking the appropriate questions and follow-up questions that make for a good interview. All right, guys, we'll stop there for today. If anyone had issues getting into the breakout rooms and to Zoom, please send me a chat and explain what problems you were facing. I know this was the first time for us to enter into the breakout rooms, at least for our class, in Zoom. I think we've done it in Microsoft Teams, but this was the first time, I think, for us to do that in Zoom. So please make sure that if you're having issues, technical issues, not sure about something, that we're working together to try to solve those issues. So again, send me a chat in Microsoft Teams with the details. All right, guys, we'll stop there. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see everyone tomorrow. Oh, another reminder, make sure for attendance purposes that if you have not done so already, that you've signed into the virtual classroom. Okay, remember between 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock each day, Monday through Friday, you're to sign in. So since we didn't do an activity in the platform itself, just a reminder, make sure that you have signed in to get credit for attendance. Okay, guys, thank you. We'll
Ben,
stop there.
Ben,
Talk to everybody tomorrow. Take care.
hello, Ben, Ben.
Ben.